And now it's my pleasure to introduce Erin Francisco. The summer Erin Francisco turned 17, a young sow fell from a hog truck passing her family's farm in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York. The pig fled into the woods where it subsisted for weeks on mushrooms and ground roots. One August afternoon, fueled by teenage ennui, Erin tramped into the woods to make a conquest. After only 2 minutes of searching, she spotted the pig snuffling in the dirt. Unsure how to persuade a pig to be her friend, Erin got down on her hands and knees and began to grunt and turn over leaves with her nose. The pig took interest and came closer, sniffling and blotting its dirty nose against her forehead. Erin lunged for the animal, grabbing the pig by its back legs and driving it from the woods like a wheelbarrow, as murderous squeals rang through the humid mountain air. Tonight, Erin attempts to recreate such a feat. No, not by grabbing you by your back legs and dragging you home, but she will get down on her hands and knees to communicate with you, trying to persuade you to recognize something familiar, something human in her movements and sounds.
Thanks, Elka. If I owe you thanks, I'm just banking this, Donna. Way up there. Oh, okay. If I owe you thanks, just you know who you are, so thank you. I'm just gonna read a short excerpt from a short story called "The Drive," and our narrator, his name is Jay, and he's in his early 20s, and he works at a convenience store in his hometown, which is an isolated village in the middle of my beloved upstate New York. Today, I was stocking the beer coolers toward the back at around 6:30 or so, when a buddy of mine came in through the door. It was Trevor, from the sound of his clunky boots, big old steel-toed work boots that were so gray and cracked that they looked like they could have never possibly been new. Trevor never tied the laces of the boots, probably because they'd break if he tried, so they always made this clobbering sound against any hard surface he walked on. I heard the boots come up behind me as I knelt beside a crate of beer and felt a knobby knee nudge me hard on the left ass cheek, and I nearly fell headfirst into the open cooler. I turned to see Trevor standing there with that bristly grin on his tan face. His hair was so blonde that no matter how old he got, he always looked like he was only 15 years old. Trevor was a few years younger than me, and he'd just finished high school at the beginning of the summer. "Hey man, how's it going?" was all he said with that blonde grin. "Pretty good, jackass. How are you? Give me a hand up," I said. He pulled me to my feet and slapped me on the back, still grinning at the floor. "I'm good," he said. "Leaving. Next week for trucking school, man." He finally lifted his eyes to my face, still smiling, but this time his teeth didn't show through in his usual grin. I smiled back and said, "Holy shit, congrats, man. When'd you fight all this out?" "Well, I was thinking about applying, and when I didn't get into Morrison for diesel, I decided this would be the way to go. It just took me a while to get around to it, that's all." "Well, shit, that's really great, man," was all I could say. Les was in the back office doing inventory and probably listening to the radio, meaning I was in charge of the store. I closed the beer cooler, and Trevor and I talked a little while we moseyed up to the counter. Trevor grabbed a liter of Coke and a paper for his dad. I rang up his stuff and we said goodbye. The blonde bristles on his chin twinkled in the light of sundown like fiber optic needles on a plastic Christmas tree. He waved and left the store. By the time Trevor was gone, it was after 7. No one was in the store or even filling out up at the gas pumps. So I walked to the door and held it open, leaning against the glass and letting the cool air rush in from the oncoming night. I watched a car stop at the slowly blinking traffic light outside. Fumes curled out of their exhaust pipe as they turned right towards Oneonta. I thought about Trevor getting out of the valley soon, and how I'd worked at the Quickie Mart for 3 years now. No other jobs on the side or in between. I mean, I'd applied to a few colleges before graduating from high school, but I had no idea what I wanted to study if I got in. So when the time came to decide if I wanted to go or not, I opted not to. It seemed like the future was too wide open, like I was on a road that didn't fork or turn or anything. It just kept getting wider, adding lanes upon lanes. But the thing is, all the lanes went in the same direction. So I figured I'd stay on the one I was in and just wait for a sign to tell me where I was even headed, or if I should get into another lane or go somewhere else. I explained this feeling to Sienna, my ex-girlfriend, a bunch of times, and she seemed to understand me, but eventually things began to fall apart the longer she was gone. I couldn't just go blindly into the future like she could, going off to school to figure out what she wanted to do, what she wanted to study. I had to figure out what I wanted first. I felt like she and I had been on the same road before, but after she left for school, I was on my own, the distance between us growing exponentially. At 9, Les came out of the back office with his coat already on and told me he was heading home for the night. I was usually the only one who worked after 9, and so I was used to closing up by myself. Hardly anyone ever came in after 9:30 anyway, so I didn't really mind being the only one working until 12. Les told me to have a good night and to drive safe. He said this every time he went to leave, and I gathered that it was more his way of saying bye rather than, I actually want you to be happy and get home without a hitch. But a lot of people do that, I think. It's not that they're being insincere, it's just that words don't mean as much as they used to after a while. Outside, the lampposts upon the building and gas pumps had turned on and were blaring neon white light down onto the blacktop. I really didn't like those lamps, but they were on a timer, and so I didn't have any control over when they turned on or off. But over by the register, there was a switch that turned on some Christmas lights that surrounded the checkout counter. I'm not sure when Les first put them up, but they stayed up year-round, and so I'd come to appreciate the glow they added to the store once the sun was gone down and dark had set in. I turned on the Christmas lights and sat down on the counter looking out the window. Even though the lights were only little spears of magenta, green, blue, and orange, I felt like I had somehow countered the harsh paint thinner tinge of the parking lot lamps. The night had brought with it a haze of cooler air that felt like it was falling from the sky. From my seat on the counter, I could see heat lightning jumping back and forth between faintly purple clouds. I thought maybe the lightning was the reason why not one single person had come to the store since it got dark. It's funny how the strangest, most harmless things will keep people from going out. I watched the heat lightning crosshatch the sky with brilliantly etched lines that left a purple glow burning for several moments on my eyes, until a pair of headlights turned into the parking lot and stopped around the corner of the store just out of my vision. I saw a squat silhouette walk by the windows, and I hopped down off the counter and went to check on the hot dog machine, just so I at least looked busy while someone came in. The dumpy figure of Marlene Camp shuffled in through the door and beelined back toward the coffee machines. I should have figured she would come to the Quickie Mart tonight, even if no one else did. Marlene worked as a custodian at the school and had been there for as long as I could remember. She had a daughter named Kira who graduated 3 or 4 years ahead of me, but we'd never been friends and she seemed to want to keep to herself. I was under the impression that Kira thought her mom was kind of an embarrassment or a burnout. I knew Marlene had a lot of close family ties in the village, and many of those relatives had gotten mixed up in drugs or alcohol or the like. But somehow, I didn't think that family woes qualified Marlene as a burnout. Not that I was any authority on Marlene or anybody else. I just felt like I saw things in people that maybe they didn't see in themselves. Marlene came up to the counter with 4 coffees in a cardboard carrier. She did this almost every night of the week. I knew the other custodians at the school, too. Some of them had been former students, and most of them had been working there ever since I was a little kid. But Marlene was the only one who came to the Quickie Mart and bought coffee for all the others, and this made me like her. Marlene was never much of a talker, I had noticed, but still she seemed friendly behind all that silence. Perhaps she was just one of those people who seems constantly embarrassed just to be alive. I admit, I've sometimes felt that way when I've seen old classmates come into the store. The way they ask how you're doing feels stale, even belittling. But Marlene seemed less withdrawn tonight. Perhaps the excitement of the heat lightning had infected her usual demeanor. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, as she slid the coffees onto the counter. "Pretty good, can't complain," she replied. "Got cold real fast, didn't it?" "Yeah, it was insanely hot today. Now it's cooled off and the sky's looking pretty jumpy," I said. She looked a little confused for a moment, her eyes twitching around to glance out the window. By the look on her face, I could see she was miles away inside her head, so I didn't attempt to force the conversation any further. As she stood there, searching through whatever thoughts lay behind those eyes, I felt compelled to tell her something that would let her know that I did notice her and the goodness that she treated other people with, but I couldn't put it into words. I blurted out the only thing I could think to say. "You're a good one, Miss Marlene." She didn't say anything back as she made her way to the door, but I thought I saw her attempt to smile as she went back out into the brisk air. No one else came into the store after Marlene left, so I spent most of the night nursing a carton of chocolate milk and pacing around the store, standing outside for a couple minutes at a time. Closing was easy, since Les had cleaned most everything up before he left. All I did was stash the cash into the safe in the back room and empty all the leftover hot food and coffee into the trash and dump those into the dumpster. After locking up the front and back doors, I hopped into the truck and started up for home at about 12:15. As I drove out of the parking lot, I looked up at the sky through the windshield. The heat lightning darted above my head, brighter and more frequent than before. As I drove back along 205, the heat lightning was still leaping about. Every now and then I'd glance up and catch sight of one of the jagged bolts. I wondered if lightning ever knew where it was going to strike, like if a specific place or a concentrated blob of energy or something was its target. I didn't think something like a lightning strike could be so random, and as they say, lightning never strikes in the same place twice, which to me means that it's got to be intentionally calculated somehow. The huge drop in temperature also caused the creek that runs through Mayall to roll out fog along the valley floor. The fog crept across the road at certain dips, where the drainage ditch runs deeper along the route. Although I was tired, the flashes of lightning and the smokiness from the drifts of fog held my attention. I had never seen the road like this. It was almost like something out of a movie. It was beautiful and somehow exciting. I got to wishing that I had seen this kind of night before, when Sienna and I were still together. I imagined her eyes brightening at the sight of the fog and the lightning. It was majestic, yet eerie. I was on the straightaway portion of the road beside a long, steep embankment covered in big pine trees. The embankment sloped about 40 or 50 feet below the road before leveling out again to become a cornfield that stretched toward the valley wall. As I was about to pass the line of trees, another lightning flash cracked the sky, and I glanced up to see the purple streak burn where the lightning itself had been. When I looked back at the road, I saw a boy, or a coyote, or something glowing blindingly white and tall, gazing directly into my oncoming high beams. I stomped my foot as hard as I could onto the brake pedal, and my tires let out a horrible scream that echoed inside my head like the cry of a hysterical girl. The white apparition turned and became gigantic antlers, reaching out wider than the length of my arms and glowing. I tore the wheel to the right, feeling the tires slip out underneath me and the truck leave the road. The whole world seemed silent for a minute as I gazed at the wall of pine trees slowly approaching the front. I felt all my body telescope into itself, my head slamming against the steering wheel, the glass of the windshield shattering and falling like snow onto my hair and down the back of my clothes. I was thrown against the door as the truck rolled onto its side, then upside down, and continued rolling until it slid to a stop halfway down the steep embankment covered in trees. I felt a hot pain in my side, and my eyes felt as though they were bulging underneath my eyelids. I could hear a hiss, like escaping steam coming from somewhere, but otherwise, everything had again gone silent.